year. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today from Coast Pride. Kassi Talbot is president of Coast Pride. She has her PhD from San Francisco State in educational leadership, and she is now principal of Pescadero Elementary School. She also has a master's in education equity and social justice, and she says in her profile on Coast Pride, she wants to use her position in the community to transform the school system so all students are served equitably. She was also a radio host on KPDO 89.3 in Pescadero, and she enjoys spending time with her partner, her dogs, cooking and watching a good anime series. We welcome Kassi Talbot to talk about Coast Pride.
Thank you so much for having me again. How many of you were here last time that I was here? Amazing. Can you also tell me again and remind me, how many of you are also former teachers or current teachers? Yes, okay. Brilliant. So because I've been here before, I did change. We didn't get to some of our slides last time, and I've added kind of a new context because we're in a shifting America, technically always been shifting historically, but anyways, we're in a new time right now. So I'm going to be talking about RISE, so defending LGBTQIA2S+ rights in a shifting America, technically just historically this way as well, but as a little friendly reminder to a very long acronym, what does the L stand for? Amazing. What we got for G? B, T, Q for queer, good. I? Yes, intersex. A? Asexual. 2S? Two spirit. And the plus is for the whole spectrum. Amazing. Amazing. I already had a great introduction. I wanted to just thank you all again for inviting me, and also, of course, for the library for providing this space. Thank you all. It's so good to see you. So we shouldn't be alone, and bringing them into the space as well in terms of our Indigenous identities, they're the ones that had the concept of two-spirit. So trans identities and queer ways of being have existed way before people that looked like me even arrived to this land. I forgot my identities are really important. I identify as a cisgendered, heterosexual, white female of middle-class origin, give or take. So I don't know if I'm considered middle class in today's day. My mom says I would say I'm poor, but whatever. But why that's important is all my identities play out in the way that I move in society, as I'm sure all of you have also studied as well, as how do my identities allow me to move or not move in society based on my gender, my sexuality. But in terms of positionality of power, I'm pretty close. If I was born a white male, boom, I'd be number one right now. But I'm not, slightly under. But cisgendered means that the gender that I was assigned at birth is what I identify as. Right, so cisgendered and heterosexual, white female, middle class origin. And land acknowledgement from our Indigenous identities is they coined the term two-spirit, or what is able to be translated into the English language. So when folks that look like me arrived to this land, there were people who they couldn't fit into the gender binary. Couldn't tell if they were male or female because the European brain wants to fit you into one or into those two categories. But they're like, no, those are our two-spirited folks. They inhabit and embody both genders, or a spectrum of characteristics of both. So that's why we have the 2S plus inside of the acronym. That's always one of my favorite ones. So community agreements. Do you already have working community agreements as a collaborative here? Yeah. So you know what community norms are. So we take space, make space, use I statements, what we learn here, leaves here. Sorry, learn here, leaves here, said here, stays here, and space for imperfection. Does that sound good? Mm-hmm. Amazing. So, my first activity is an old one from those of you that were here last time, is we're going to practice using pronouns with a partner. So pronoun sets, so people go by she, her, hers, or ella, he, him, his, él, and they put the él or the ella to not only be a pronoun in Spanish, but also to communicate that they speak that language sometimes. They, them, theirs, or ella, Spanish for they, and then all pronouns, multiple pronouns, no pronouns. I also can't memorize all of them, but there are a lot out there. Or you have new ones like a, am, and airs. So some of this is kind of our number one thing at Coast Pride is people always wonder, man, I've made a mistake out in the community and I've misgendered somebody. Has that happened to y'all, misgendering somebody? Or hearing of somebody that was struggling with misgendering? Maybe, or you're all experts. I think this is gonna be a very good activity. We're gonna go by real quick. So sometimes when we have folks that we're getting introduced to, that's why I always say my pronouns. So I say she, her, hers, so someone knows how they can address me. It also is a signal that I am an ally with them, so they don't have to ask. And I'm like, I already told you. But if you make a mistake, you can apologize, correct yourself, and move on. So I was talking to her, sorry, I mean they. I was talking to them and we're meeting tomorrow. If someone else makes a mistake, you can correct them and move on, but it's very quick. It's like, hi, I was talking to her, and like, oh, you were talking to them? Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was talking to them yesterday, so it's a very quick correction. And what that does is it helps the person that has they, them, their pronouns, or pronouns that are ones that you're not used to. So if someone has recently transitioned and you're having a hard time shifting from she to he or he to her, that it helps with just saying, oh, thank you, someone correct me. But if we do an over apologize, we start to make them feel a little awkward, a little embarrassed. It starts getting a bigger deal. So at Coast Pride, we just say, oh, we just correct in the moment. So someone says, oh, I was talking to her, like, oh, you were talking to him? Yes, I was talking to him, and then we move on. So what we like to do is do this activity that you probably all saw last time, is to your neighbor, tell your neighbor everything about these teddy bears, and these teddy bears are having a picnic. And at this picnic, there is food and drinks. So what are the teddy bears eating and drinking and doing at the picnic? But you're gonna refer to the teddy bears as they, as the activity. So I'll give you some time to turn to your partner. I'll give you a few minutes. Talk to your neighbor about what these teddy bears are doing and refer to them as they. I'm still wrapping my brain around it too. I was like, how is a trans individual offending your masculinity? I'm like, am I having an internal problem because I'm sexually attracted to this person in drag? Right? You're just like, it's making us feel things. Like what's, and instead of like welcoming it, be like, wow, I can find many people sexually and visually attractive, and it's not a threat to who I am. But we've grown up under the assumption that anything that disrupts what you're supposed to fit into is going to change us in some way. But it's actually having confidence in ourselves and being able to enter all those spaces and be like, it doesn't matter who I'm gonna go talk to today, I still know who I am. And if I didn't know who I was, then that's a different kind of exploration, right? But they're like, Kassi, you have a lot of queer friends. Are you sure you haven't like tested the waters? I'm like, I know who I am. Right? I've done the work. I've also had the privilege of having access to the books, to the teachers, and to a family that allowed me to explore in that way. And so I know I'm firmly in the body that I'm in the sexual interest that I'm into, and who I'm emotionally attracted to. And that's a privilege to have access to all those things and those supports. I polled some of my teachers to ask them this question as well, and they came up with, advocating for trans folks advocates for feminism. So if a trans woman can stand up there and demand her rights, I'm like, well shit, I gotta get my teeth in the game too. Like, this person went through a transition and is fighting for more rights that pertain to me as I was born into than anyone else that I'm seeing. It confronts the patriarchy. And as we know, as some of us who some or all of us that identify as women, obviously because AAUW, right? Yeah. All of us that identify as women, if they're confronting the patriarchy and the things that would oppress us, and we're not doing enough, but they're doing it, then we're probably going to join them and they're doing work for us. right? Breaks the gender binary, it shows us what's possible. One of my favorite answers from one of my teachers was like, they just make everything playful and better. I was like, brilliant, love it, I'm gonna share that with tonight's presentation. So good. Love Dr. Rome for bringing this into the space, and I'm so honored to be here with you all that I was able to use this quote. It's my first time. I was like, it's still in the works. Many of you have already been doing this or do this, but if you ever want to know, like, what can you do, you can continue to contact legislators. I was speaking to some of you earlier today, and you already do all this work, but to continue doing it, speak up against hate in conversations and meetings, share accurate info and challenge misinformation, vote and help others register, and support LGBTQIA2S+ media and art. I assume all of us are readers because we love that cabin in the woods joke with all the books, but read things that would challenge what you think we know about gender and gender expression, right? So intentionally choosing books, intentionally having conversations where the other person consents to teach you, consents to help you learn. Before I like bombard a trans person, I'm like, hey, we've known each other for a couple months. I have a question. They'll be like, sure, Kassi, let me know. It takes a while. We gotta build friendship with folks before we can bombard them with our learning, which is our responsibility. And it's our ability, and it's within our capabilities of Googling it, picking up a book, dissecting it, and learning it. And the more we know about history and how people that have been marginalized and oppressed have gained traction, have lost traction, and have ended up where they are today, the better we are at hearing when people are communicating these very subtle or sometimes very blatant lines of bigotry, racism, homophobia. I didn't hear it for a very long time until I started reading. And I had friends that were of color, queer friends that taught me, because I grew up in Pescadero my whole life, right? So I went to college thinking that if you were gay, you had to be flamboyant, you had to have your nails painted. So I was confused. When someone was really masculine and he came up, he's like, yeah, I'm gay. And I'm like, you don't look gay. They're like, well, what is gay supposed to look? And I was like, aren't you supposed to be like, you know, flamboyant and like have the thing? He's like, honey, where have you grown up? And I'm like, Pescadero. So I was like, I'm really sorry, it's so much you guys. So when I tell my students that story, they're like, why are you teaching this so hardcore, bro? I'm like, because you are not going out there doing the same shit I did. Okay, you're gonna know. You're gonna know that you can be this wide spectrum and just watch and listen, give them the pronouns that they say they are, figure it out later with the book. You know what I'm saying? Don't embarrass yourself out there. So, and another one was, didn't know racism was still a thing. You know, I was raised by parents in the 60s and grew up in the 60s and the 50s. And after the civil rights movement, it kind of had the sentiment that, everyone had made it, but there wasn't really a teaching of you're the next generation that's got to continue until we finally arrive. And now with reading and learning and constantly questioning myself, I realize it'll still take my lifetime and even more to actually arrive. So I will not be able to see the arrival of pure queer acceptance and anti-racist bliss, but I'm gonna start doing my part. I'm gonna definitely do my darndest. And strengthen community. So I hope, as my last thing of the evening, is I want to extend an invitation to join our Pride events. So the last thing I'll say today, in addition to a deep and profound thank you, is we have a Pescadero Pride March. This is on our Coast Pride website. We've got Make It Maine, June 5th. June 7th is Pacifica Pride. We got San Mateo County Pride, and we'll be marching in that one too. And then of course, June 22nd from 11 to 3:30, we'll have Half Moon Bay Pride. So I hope I get to see all of you there, and thank you so much for such an amazing evening. Are there any other questions I can answer for you? Sorry, getting tongue-tied towards the end of the evening. Questions? Yes, I see two, yes.
Well, I was just gonna add that I think one way we can also help resist is help the Transgender Law Center and promoting laws that make transgender rights, true rights.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm not going to say I'm perfect because I go through the whole mental battle as well. But well, if a person is like physically stronger, but they're like the women's sports, I think I was like, who cares? I'm like, I'm just gonna caught up on it. Then the kids are just like, they're having the battle with me, and I'm like, oh my god, what if we just had human teams? I was like, everyone gets to try out, but instead of like WNBA, NBA, we're just gonna have the human team. I just want your best, brightest, and strongest. Don't care what gender you are. I'd be like, ooh, that's cool. And the kids are like, I don't think that's what we're saying. I'm like, I think that's exactly what we said. Golden. Question, yes.
I mean, like, overall, are you feeling positive, or, I mean, with all of the rhetoric and the legislation, I mean, does it just say, oh, I have to work harder, or like, what's it, I mean, what kind of feeling?
I think because based on who you voted for really tells a person almost everything you need to know about where that person is in their belief structure, it's created a very stark political polarity. Like, it's kind of really sad that all I have to do is ask a person like who they voted for to like say so many things about them. It's kind of embarrassing because it didn't used to be that way. It was more hidden though. It's always been this way theoretically in terms of oppression. Not theoretically, in reality. But now it's you have to be in the binary. You gotta be over here. You gotta be over there. And no one's coming together. And we're just staying further and further apart. So, long-winded answer is, I think it's emboldening people to speak up against queer rights. And at the same time, more people are realizing they can no longer stay on the sidelines of support, but to do more. So I'm hopeful in the face of really stark oppression. Of being like, oh, people that were kind of on the gray lines, like, this is California, we're like right down from San Francisco, the queers are fine. The queers are fine. Now it's like, oh, well, my pride is coming to Half Moon Bay, my pride is coming to Pescadero, and I'm gonna show up this year. Right? Or I'm going to volunteer this year, or I'm gonna donate this year, because they're having a really hard struggle. And I'm not gonna lie, our funding is mainly grant and state-based. It's not very private, like it's not very privately funded. So 90% of our funding is in danger, but I'm hopeful that we'll find a way through corporate and private donors to obviously keep staying as a presence here in Half Moon Bay.
Yeah. So if all the DEI instruction and even mentioning it, like, is stopped, let's say it's stopped for 3 years, I mean, and it's not gonna be easy to, I mean, how do you recover from, I mean, because there's gonna be a whole generation of kids that aren't gonna know everything that this and I'm not trying to sound like a white bat, but they're not gonna know all the terrible things that happened in this country that we have to face and try and be better than if it just gets erased from the history books and stuff.
Assuming we still have history books.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, this is turning really dark. Okay, so then you also have to remember that those who were teachers are teachers, and you taught your kids. There are these amazing things called books that are still in your home. You can still homeschool kids or watch documentaries. It's harder to do. The kids won't have that support in the schools. And when the kids come home with crazy things that they're asking questions about, hopefully you can set people straight. But we can't throw up as much as I'd like to throw up my hands and scream and rip out my hair, I hearken back to the days after the Reconstruction where black people voted and then they hung them. And they kept trying, and they kept going to vote knowing that they'd probably get killed. So at what point are we in this country going to start shooting each other again? Or are we going to come to some kind of resolution? I mean, I think probably most of us here have gone on the street corner and demonstrated in some way. And by pushing back and saying, maybe I voted for the person who's in the administration, but I don't agree with what they do. So.
And I read a really good tip, if you can afford it, if you're in a bookstore or something, buy copies of the books that are on the banned list.
Yes.
So when they're no longer in print and people wanna read them, you would have a copy to loan out and stuff. I mean, yeah.
And there are corporations who haven't given up on DEI, they're
Right.
pushing back.
Right,
So
yeah.
it's not, everybody just didn't fall down.
Right.
People who should have had spines fell down, but not everybody's falling down.
I called this presentation Rise from a recent scholar who just graduated, Dr. Omar Khoury, and I called it Rise because he is a Black queer man, and he proudly said rise, as in there's no point in history that Black, Asian, women, disabled, queer people have not risen to the occasion. So have people seen worse tyrannies than the current one that we're in? Yes. And have they risen historically? Absolutely. So he said rise because there's no way that social justice, or you want to call it just the human rights or the rights to exist, would ever go away when you still have all these folks of color that have done it before historically, all these queer folks that have done it before, all the women, the legacy of women for fighting for their own body autonomy, for the right to divorce, for the right to remarry, for the right for their own body autonomy, that would ever stop. So even though we're in this time of uncertainty, I don't doubt that we will rise. I don't know when. Probably gonna get worse before it gets better, but I don't doubt the rising of everybody.
Yay!
I do have a question, what is the state of trans care in California, because you had that on your slide?
Oh, on the
Yeah.
last one about
Yeah.
the trans care?
Yeah. What did you-
Yeah. We still have, because of our state funding, thus far, unfortunately, we do have to follow the passport ban, right? So if you had a dead name, that's how trans folks refer to the name that they were born with. But now that they identify differently, maybe have a different name, they do very, very unfortunately with passport renewal have to go back to their dead name and their dead gender, which is really traumatizing because it's not an identity that they have any longer. In terms of trans care, I see, once again, not an expert, but I do hear communication about trying to find access to the medication that they need. Nothing is blatant in the state of California of being arrested if you're a doctor that's providing trans care, but people are increasing their worry about it. In terms of you're like a doctor and have a practice and you're trans affirming, gender affirming care, which is really hard to find. And then that's under danger of being persecuted. There's worry, but nothing as a blatant policy thus far. And we gotta make sure that it stays that way, that there is no policy against gender affirming and trans care.
And is the Half Moon Bay parade on Sunday? That one's on a Sunday,
June 22nd, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me double check, is it a Sunday?
It is a Sunday, the other ones were on Saturday.
Yes, then that is correct,
Oh,
yes.
that's okay, that's unusual. Put a parade on Sunday then, good.
Yeah, I think because, let's look at this, is to have all the prides in my calendar here. Yeah, because San Mateo County has it on the 14th, Half a Day Pride, 22nd, Sunday. Mm-hmm.
Oh, maybe the city's tying it into the Sundays that they do too, in that neutral park and stuff, maybe too.
I think so.
Yeah, and that's a Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Just-
Should be a fun time. Any other questions? Yes.
What sparked your interest in this area? I mean, it sounds like you've been doing it for a long time, but anything
In terms of social justice work or
Yeah.
career?
social justice equity?
Ooh. I was getting my teaching credential and someone had asked if we should have ever done, like if it was a group discussion about Brown versus Board of Education, which was 1954 and what integrated schools across racial divide. And they're like, asked us to discuss in, this is 2017, they asked us to chat about, should we have stayed separated? And I was like, of course not, then we wouldn't have been able to learn from each other. And there's a man who's salingly black, an African American at the table, he's like, I would have stayed separate. And I was like, how could you say that? And he's like, me teaching what would probably end up happening, Kassi, is I would be telling you about myself, about what it means to be black, what it means to be a male in society, but it would be harder, it's more work to teach you as a white person about what it means to be black in America, because you have no idea, nor can you. So it's easier for us to be with our own if we keep with the system of white supremacy. And I was like, crap. I was like, I guess I gave the wrong, so of course in my whiteness, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I offended you, I gave you the wrong answer. Right? I'm more worried about the wrong answer than what it actually meant for me to learn about my whiteness. So then I went to this training, SSS, on how to be an equity facilitator. Blew my mind. It only took 5 days, but I realized, I'm like, I have not really been taught history with a lens of criticality or some type of ownership, and that I have a role to play in its betterment. So then, you go, as many of you know, you go down a million different ways. I'm just like, Dad, where are we from? Like, we're from Ireland. I'm like, why? He's like, potato famine. I'm like, cool. And then I'm just like, what do we do when we got here? He's like, well, we kind of killed the Native Americans for their land, got a little plot, went to Missouri, came over to California. I'm like, we killed people. So then it goes down this whole thing. I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we did this so much earlier? So I'm just like, okay, but age appropriate stuff. You're like, okay, my dad, he is the person that did play Braveheart when I was 5 years old, a little too young for that. But so he'd probably be like, we killed people. I'd be like, Dad, the kid's 4. Like we move people non-consensually from their land as Irish migrants. And then, so then you go down a million different ways. In my case, a little bit of my own family history and what we did, a little bit of ownership, working with white fragility, and I'm like, okay. And then it just kind of kept going, and it's never ending. And so then it branched into like, okay, black and brown bodies, Asian bodies, World War II, Japanese Americans. And I'm like, oh, what about Italians here in Half a Bay and how they couldn't cross the street because they would they're afraid they were gonna hold up lanterns and signal German bombers. I'm like, okay, so like white migrants are experiencing shit too. It just goes down this whole thing. I was like, man, there's so much to learn. And then eventually I get recruited by Jenny Walter and joined Coast Pride, and I realized like that too is a facet of activism, and every ethnicity and every race also shares that same facet, that same identity of queerness. So this applies to all, and so does the fight for racial justice, for gender equality, all of it. It's all the things. Disability. Sorry, that was really long-winded, but yes, that's how we got into it. Yeah. All right, really good. How to change things.